we're going to spend the next hour together talking about ethics. And the first thing I'd like to do is to find out what people talked about at lunch. People had 3 scenarios, and I'm going to read each of them for those of you who didn't know what the other 2 are. Here's one. In your historical film featuring memories of the Vietnam era, you have some great footage that makes your point. The only problem is that to get a plausible sequence, you'll have to interpolate some close-ups from a demonstration in Philadelphia into a story about Washington, D.C. Now, they happened at the same time. So you'll only use a few close-ups. Can you use the Philadelphia footage as a substitute for DC footage that you don't have? Is there a table that somebody volunteer from the table that came to a conclusion about that? Do we have a volunteer to say what happened? Okay, just tell us your name. Do you know why you said no? Did other people have reasons for saying no? Historical accuracy, okay. Pardon? Some people worry about that because they know that this will not only be a record that they're portraying as real, but that in the future other documentarians will use their own film as archival footage, and so that will become part of the historical record from then on. So historical accuracy, anything else? It's just wrong. Because we're documentarians and we believe in telling the truth. This, by the way, is a kind of an extreme example, but it's an extremely common occurrence for people to use archival footage that not only is not from from the right place, but isn't even from the right time. And they do it for all the reasons that that you would think they would. Like, it's cheaper, it's easier. Nobody's going to really care. Those are some of the things you hear from people about the budget was too tight, the time was too short. We just had to do it. But I think, was there anybody who came to a different conclusion on that? Okay. Here's another one. You're on a film shoot chronicling a group of mountain climbers on an ascent. You develop a good relationship with them and they trust you. As they relax in the evenings, they forget that the camera is running and they behave in ways they will be embarrassed by later. Inappropriate language, gestures, revelation of antisocial attitudes. Now, they did sign releases, so legally you can use this material. Obviously, it will be humiliating to some of those people. And you could use it, should you use it? Can we get a volunteer from one of the tables that discussed this to say what you guys concluded?
Hi.
And tell us your name.
I'm Marilyn Becker. Well, we had 2 different discussions at the table, and at the end, they both came out the same, which was pretty interesting. So we decided that it depended on your intention going into the film. If you went in as a true documentarian, not knowing what was going to happen, and you discovered that at the end, perhaps, these climbers were hideous fiends who left others to die while they trudged to the summit, then you might want to include these embarrassing moments as points of character reference to show the disgusting nature of these types. So that, in that case, you could use it, and that would be a true documentarian approach. But it needed to serve your story. So if it did not serve your story, there would be no point in putting it in.
Okay. Did people have, did any other discussions reflect different points of view or different reasons for the choice? Yes. And tell us who you are.
Hi, my name is Alex. We had basically the same conclusions, but we also said you could just ask them, especially if you had such a good relationship with them, and tell them why you might want to use this footage in your movie and see if they would allow you to. Just to have some respect with the people that you're working with.
Mm-hmm. So you wouldn't warn them at the time you were filming them that you were still filming them?
Well, I mean, they should know that you're filming them if you're sitting there with a camera. But
you'd think, wouldn't you? How many people have been in a situation filming somebody who actually sort of forgot that this stuff was going to be immortalized forever? Yeah, I would say that that is a really big experience. Okay, and somebody else had another comment. Okay, so part of your the question is, what is your story? And one part of the question is, what is your relationship with those people? Because if you're just going to make fun of them, it's an exploitative relationship. And if what you're talking about has relevance to what you're saying about them, that is still a judgment call. And you might not respect them. You might find them to be reprehensible people who did terrible things. But it would be taking into consideration what? Mm-hmm.
That I forgot to mention, we also touched on a very interesting topic that had to do with undercover filmmaking. So for example, if your agenda is different than the people who you're covering. So for example, we took, if you're traveling with the guerrillas or with the soldiers who think you're going to glorify them, but your secret agenda is another hideous fiend agenda, to show that. Mm-hmm. Then we started discussing the ethics of undercover documentary filmmaking, in the sense that, the trust relationship, is it truly a trust? In other words, they trust you, but are you being ethical by doing that? So we didn't really come to a conclusion, but it really was a broader discussion on the what happens in that situation.
How many people here have represented themselves as have had an agenda different than the one you told your subjects? Okay, I think that happens with some frequency as well, and that is a point of debate in the documentary community. When would it be legitimate to misrepresent the situation, either by omission or commission, as they would say in my Lutheran Sunday school? So let me go on to the third one. You're making a film about an ex-con's re-entry into society. She's joined a mosque after converting to Islam in prison. You've been working with her for about 14 months, and then you find out that she's under surveillance by the FBI. So is this information you share with her or not? Can we get the results of a discussion from one table? Okay, you and then Vicki. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would say that our group found this a very difficult question, and we had various points of view about it. One of our members felt that if you told her and you went into advocacy on her behalf against the FBI, you might have trouble finding funding from people in the future that would really prefer that you were not advocates.
Or even get your film seen.
Or for instance. We also felt that the question might be changed depending on how you found out about it. For instance, if the FBI came to you and asked for your footage, you might have one point of view, whereas if you just seemed to notice that there was somebody following you a lot, you might have another attitude about whether you told her or not. So, and we had one person...
Just tell us a little bit about what motivates that decision. Why is that different?
Help.
Sometimes it's just so obvious, but we'd like to hear it out loud.
So, I don't know. I mean...
Well, there must be some reason why those two situations look different to you.
Well, I think if you were asked by the FBI for your footage, then they're actually trying to make you into their pawn or they're working with them. And so you might feel very much like you just want to back up and get away. And if you notice that somebody was following you, and you might want to say, haven't you seen that car somewhere before?
So you would be, at that point, it's not a question of she's being surveilled, but you're both being surveilled.
Exactly.
So you have an equal interest in trying to figure out what's going on or describing what's going on.
And then there was one guy at the table who felt that it's her story and you should be the fly on the wall. And so you have nothing to say to her.
Because,
Then it would change the story.
okay.
And it's not your place as the fly on the wall to change her story.
Okay. Yes.
Our table discussed it, and if more information is something we wanted, because all ethical decisions are situational, and the more you know about the situation helps. On the face of it, if you've developed a close relationship, filming a person as a subject, you would want to share it with them, and it might improve the film. It opens up a dimension of what's going on now with this surveillance. It might affect your story in a good way, and you're affecting the story already by having the camera, editing in various ways. The one outside chance that this might be real terrorism rather than general surveillance, that would maybe change the situation if you thought there was some kind of imminent danger. But you needed to know more. But basically, it's just general surveillance, the kind that happened after 9/11. Yeah, share it with your partner in the filmmaking.
So you feel as a filmmaker that if you're convinced that she poses a threat to society, then you would feel like cooperating with the FBI by keeping it a secret would be a good idea. But if you don't believe she does pose a threat to society, then you think you would tell her?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. I'm sorry, we missed her.
Speaking for my table. Well, Ginny was at our table, and so she immediately thought the question was put on the table because she was at our table.
This is Ginny
So,
Geron.
Ginny Geron.
Ginny Geron made a film about Islam in prison.
Yeah. So needless to say, I hadn't even read the question before she voiced her opinion, which was, yes, definitely tell the person. And
Did she explain why, or do?
because of what she had learned in making her film, which is oftentimes people are under FBI surveillance for reasons that just have to do with their religion or, that sort of thing. And I also immediately said yes, because I had a history of investigating government abuses. And so the FBI surveillance part, well, first of all, I said, if she's under FBI surveillance, and I'm under FBI surveillance, and that goes without saying. And I felt that if I had known the person for 14 months, I would have a good sense about whether or not they were dangerous, and I would tell them as well. Other people in our group said that they felt that they would want to weigh the purpose of the film and how it would impact the film. And a lot of people just wanted more information before coming to a decision. They felt that it was a situation that you really would want to investigate fully before making a decision.
Got it. Other people, yes.
That affected their opinions about whether or not the subject should be told. There were those who had sort of profound mistrust of government and sort of the whole nature of surveillance. And from that point of view, it was no question that the person ought to be informed. Other points were the fly on the wall issue was raised, though we talked about the fact that once the cameras are there, you've already changed the story of this person's life, and so how do you know? You've already affected the story, so affecting it more or less is certainly a judgment call. So we had no consensus except for the fact that depending on where we all came from and what our life experiences had been up until that moment, that affected how we saw the issue.
Right.
profoundly.
Thank you very much. I want to move on to the second part of the presentation, but I think that the discussion that we've just had and the discussion you had at lunch is very typical of the tentative and really first-level discussion that we're having about ethics in real life in documentary communities. There are easier questions and harder questions, and people are still working to articulate the reasons behind their gut feeling for why they do what they do. I want to use that as a segue to talk about the report that we finished this year called Honest Truths, Documentary Filmmakers on Ethical Challenges in Their Work, and it's available on our website. It's pretty short. I want to thank Mridu Chandra. Is Mridu here? Mridu coordinated this. Oops. Wait a second. How do I go back? There we go. Mridu coordinated all of the interviews on this report, and we were very pleased also to work with an advisory board, Sheila Curran-Bernard, John Elson, Bill Nichols, to coordinate response. Maura Ugarte, Maura, you're here somewhere. There, Maura, stand up. Maura was here in the Center for Social Media coordinating on-site all the interviews that she and Mridu set up. And she was the project manager on the study, and we're very grateful to her. So what we did in this report was to ask filmmakers not what they thought about ethics in general, but to reflect upon a recent situation where they actually had an ethical conflict, and to explore with them how they dealt with it and how they thought about it and why they did what they did. So we found out, basically, that in spite of the fact that everybody says that all these situations are contextual, you always need more information, every one of them is specific, and my situation in particular is extremely unique and has nothing in common with each other. In fact, there were three very, very clear, commonly held values. One was, do no harm, the George Stoney honorary statement, do no harm, but what they meant typically was not do no harm in general to your subjects, but do no harm to your vulnerable subjects. People who were investigating financial corruption did not feel an obligation to be nice to the people who they were accusing of corruption. People who dealt with celebrities did not feel any need to protect them at all. But people who were dealing with ordinary people really felt like, don't take their livelihood away for the day that I interviewed them, don't make their lives worse, don't put them at risk. They also believed, give viewers an honest report here. Show them what actually happened. This does not mean accuracy in the journalistic moment-by-moment sense of accuracy. I don't have to show them all 6 takes of the interview that I did over 2 days. I can combine that interview into one interview if I can make it look seamless. But I do want to represent honestly what really happened to the viewer. And finally, I want to be responsible. Somebody funded this, somebody started it, I had a vision of it, a company paid me to do this, I need to honor those contracts. Those 3 things are 3 different relationships. And all of them involve integrity and honesty. Be honest to your subjects, be honest to your viewers, be honest to your patrons or your funders. And of course, the problem is that each of these is a completely plausible and important value. It's just that they come into conflict with each other. I mean, nobody goes around saying, well, I plan to hurt innocent people, and I plan to lie to viewers, and I plan to stiff my funder. They want to do right by all 3, but the problem is that frequently these things come into conflict. At some point you're in the editing room and you know that you want to tell a story to the viewer and there's information that may embarrass a subject. Or you might have a really great shot of them that makes them look a little funny. But it'll be a really dramatic moment. How are you going to resolve those problems? What happens when the company gives you only so much money and you're going to have to be able to do what you can do on that money. When I gave you the 3 questions, they are examples of the 3 different relationships. The shoot chronicling a group of climbers on an ascent. They signed, well, let me go back to the historical film featuring memories of the Vietnam era. Can you use the footage from Philadelphia? There's an example of, does that constitute lying to your viewers? And everybody said yes. But why would you cheat on that? Because you're really short on money from your funder. You're on the shoot. You don't want with the climbers. You might end up embarrassing them, but the footage is really, really great. Will you embarrass them in order to provide a really entertaining view to the viewer, entertaining film to the viewer? If you're working for Nat Geo or Discovery, you may very well be in a position where you'd better make it unbelievably entertaining at every moment. How about the ex-con and your relationship to your subject? You don't want to do them harm, but which way is it that you will do them the least harm? When we talked to people, they did not have a good vocabulary to describe the problems that they were facing, even though when you dug under the surface, it was clear that they did hold common values. And the reception of Honest Truth since has been impressive in the sense that people again and again say to us, I see the problems of my field reflected to me in that report. What can be done to try to make a conversation about ethics more vital, more cohesive, to develop a shared vocabulary? We think the consequences of not resolving those 3 things, those 3 relationships, not figuring out how to own the decision on where you're going to make the call, ends you up playing the role of victim in one of 2 ways, which is you say to people, well, Discovery made me do it. The funder didn't give me enough money. Or you say, hey, the film had to get made. Sorry, it was the only way. And those are both ways of ducking your responsibility for owning any of those decisions. They're ways of saying, couldn't help it, I'm a victim of circumstance, which is not, in my opinion, a grown-up way to behave. So, we suggested in the report that there were 2 things that we thought might help, one of which was to have more open conversations about the problems of documentary ethics. And I'm very pleased to see Melissa Houghton here from Women in Film and Video. Melissa, will you wave? Women in Film and Video in DC has been hosting a series of private discussions, basically quiet meeting discussions that go unrecorded, in which people can openly talk about real problems they are facing. And hopes to continue that conversation and be able to evolve into a conversation that can be more public. What we're discovering again and again is that people in highly public situations feel very vulnerable about any decisions that they might have to confess to actually making. But the other thing we're suggesting is that the documentary film community can evolve a code of best practices in documentary ethics that would allow people that you are mentoring, your interns, your peers, your colleagues, your students, to be able to understand what the highest standards of the field are when we feel we can honor them, and how people do face and resolve that inevitable conflict between your 3 sets of relationships that must be maintained to make a film. In the pursuit of this, we've been trying to find standards and practices made by other people in the field to do such a thing, and we came across the Safeguarding Trust site at the BBC. This is a site that is required for anybody who has an outside vendor who has a BBC contract for a documentary to visit. Has anybody already been to it, Safeguarding Trust? You're going to love it. It is just fascinating. We've dummied up a few examples from Safeguarding Trust for you here. They're not as lovely as what's on the site because it's hard to take the images from the site and put them up on a PowerPoint. They work better if you're facing a small screen. So I do encourage you to go to Safeguarding Trust. But what I'd like to do with you here is to walk through a few of these examples from Safeguarding Trust. And it's organized in terms of, I think, reality television, which the BBC does a lot of, observational, and nature. So here's a situation that the BBC site, it's a scenario that the BBC site asks you to make a decision on. And when you're done making the decision, they actually record that decision on their site. And they record the amount of time it took you to come to it. And then they tell you whether that accords with what the BBC uses as practice and why. So it's extremely helpful to all of us, not just to the filmmakers who are having to pass through their ethics door to get the contract. So let's take a look at one of their reality shows. Now this is a reality show called Frump to Fashionista. So people who really dress badly get a makeover and then they look better. And so all of these people are people who have suffered rejection because of the way they dress. And then they get made over. So you follow their emotional journey from being socially peripheral to the life and soul of the party, all because they got these new clothes. Another example of really deep reality television. So you hope that all of them will show a big personal transformation and will talk candidly about the problems associated with a lack of confidence and social acceptance. So that's the emotional core of this reality show. Gotta have it. So it's really working out for you well, but you think that one of your contributors comes across extremely badly at the start. So if you include this footage, there's a danger he could become subject to more ridicule, his self-esteem could nosedive, you'd be, first of all, the emotional payoff of your film would not work out, but also, I mean, how cruel is that? So, what are you gonna do? Are you gonna reshoot your contributor after his makeover, talking about the beginning of his transformation? You use a few extracts of the original footage that show him in the best light possible in his original clothes. That's number one. Reshoot after the makeover, and he talks about what it was like before. 2, tell it as it happens, and the fact that he looked very odd at the beginning will show, that will just boost the amazing transformation that he makes at the end. Number 3 is reshoot the contributor in his least bad old clothes, but suggest that this was filmed at the start of his transformation. So he's now experienced on camera, so it won't be quite so bad. He won't be as awkward. So your first one is reshoot after the fact, the second one is use the original footage, and the third one is reshoot him to be not so awkward. All right? So, where's Claire? Do I now hit the, okay. I hit it to open the polling, right? So do you all have your clickers? Okay, so don't hit it yet. Reshoot is 1, tell it as it happened is 2, and reshoot and pretend that it was at the beginning. Okay, now vote. 1, 2, or 3. Just hit 1, 2, or 3 on your clickers. If you don't have a clicker, find Allison. Allison. Okay, some of you are not voting. Make a decision, people. One click. Yes, you can't vote twice. I don't know if it'll let you. I don't think so. Oh, yeah, you could change your answer, but you can't vote twice. Okay. Has everybody voted? The thing is, it's still coming in, so I think it's just still registering. All right. All right, people. How did you vote? Come on. I have no idea. My technical advisor is coming to help you.
There we go.
Oh, wrong space bar. Space bar, I'm sorry. All right. So 37% of you said reshoot him after his makeover, talking about the transformation. Almost 60% of you said, go ahead, use the footage. And the third is that very few of you thought it would be okay to reshoot and pretend that it was the way it was in the past. Okay. This is what the BBC says. Reshoot after the makeover. This is the best option. Even though you've had to step away from the usual format, you've managed to find a way to protect a vulnerable contributor and also stay true to the story you're trying to tell. So they're trying to get to go here with this film. They're trying to make the film honor the production concept, but they also don't want it to completely screw that character. Observational. That's like cinema verite. Okay, so you're making a film about a documentary about a lifeboat, and you actually get this difficult and exciting rescue. Somebody nearly loses his life, and then the volunteer lifeboat man is totally exhausted, and he tells you he's been up for 27 hours because he already completed an unusually busy shift in his day job. Okay, this is a really good angle. Guy worked a really long shift in his day job and then came and did this heroic rescue and stayed to the end, 27 hours. It might look a bit thin because you didn't get any footage of him working. You didn't even know there was going to be this crisis. So you really wish you'd been able to film him earlier that day so you could illustrate exactly why he was so tired on the night of the rescue. That's your problem. Okay, so what are you going to do? Restage the day job shift. Use the sequence as a stylized flashback. Number 2, accept the miss, describe the day job in the commentary. 3, ask him to restage his day job so that the audience can see how unusually busy it was. You're showing what really happened, so there's no need to label it. So number 1 is restage it, but show it stylized, so that it will be clear that it was restaged. Number 2, give up. Tell him a narrative that he had a hard day. Number 3, restage it, but don't label it, or don't let people know that it was restaged. All right, now don't do anything until I hit the right button. What's this? All right, so number 1, restage it and stylize it. Number 2, accept the miss. Number 3, restage it and don't label it. Tick, 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 tick. Okay. See, one more person voted that time. Okay, did everybody vote? All right, I'm closing the polling. All right, 51% of you, what? Come back. 51% of you said, restage it and stylize it. 31% of you said give up. 18% said restage it and don't let anybody know. Okay? So this is actually, I mean, there's a wide range of opinion here. There's significant portions on all of those. And here's what the BBC says. Restage it and stylize it. This is a good option. Using the reconstruction as part of a narrative flashback told in the past tense means that it's sufficiently different from the rest of the observational footage. It won't mislead the audience into believing they're watching it as it happens real life. And that's really important in observational because the premise, the claim to the viewer is we're showing you what's really happening. So it's a real violation of that promise to the viewer if you're going to fake it. Okay, natural history, bugs. Rare beetle. You're filming a rare Japanese beetle with a bizarre parenting strategy that has been described in a prestigious scientific journal. Nobody has ever filmed this beetle before. You may think that sounds odd, but it's absolutely possible. There are so many species of bugs that we have no idea. Oops, oh no, now what did I do? Can I get my technical expert back? Thank you. All right. Okay, so I'm not a Mac person. All right. Rare beetle, you've shot most of the sequence, which shows young beetles emerging from their father's pouch and feeding on a secretion from his mouth. The father dies after the event, and you cannot find any more beetles. But you're still missing some crucial tight shots to make a comfortable sequence. Those of you who are laughing have never done nature photography. This is a nightmare in nature photography. Okay, 3 choices. Make a model of the father beetle. Use CGI to create the father and insert the CGI image into the back of the shot so that the young appear to be swarming in front of it. And number 3, give up, make the best of a weaker sequence while stressing in the commentary what a unique event it is. So number 1, make a model. Number 2, okay, we have some laggards here. I know this is hard. Oh, come on, we can make it 167. Come on, people. All right. What? I know, but the 2 of those people just really don't care about bugs. Okay. Here we go. All right. So, come on, people. Stay here. Okay. So, only 20% said make a model. Only 31% said use CGI. And almost half of you said give up, just tell people in the commentary how unique it was. And what the BBC would want you to do is number 3, make the best of a weaker sequence while stressing in the commentary what a unique event it was. And they say, yes, this is the best option. By stressing the uniqueness of the event in the commentary, the audience may be more inclined to accept the lower production value of the sequence, recognizing its scientific or revelatory value. Now, here's further analysis. They feel very, very, very particular about their nature programming. Once again, because they are making a particular claim to the audience about what they're going to see, which is a very different claim than what is made, for instance, in reality television. They say audiences place a very high degree of trust in the BBC's natural history programs. If we say we're showing them unique footage, then this footage needs to be what we say it is. That said, the reality of filming the natural world means that it's not always possible to record everything that you need to make a sequence work. Various interventions may be necessary in the editing process. It's not wrong to use models and CGI. See, for those, the 20 and 31% who went for models and CGI, all you needed was more information. It becomes misleading when you haven't alerted the audience to what you've done. So that's their standard. It's not bad to do it, but you must label it. Nobody can be misled about what you're actually showing. If it's clearly signposted, then its use is acceptable. Okay, so you can see in the BBC that they're trying hard to not just tell you, well, what's the right answer to us? They're not even making a claim that this is the right answer. They're saying this is how the BBC does it. And then they say, this is why. And they're referring again and again to promises that filmmakers in our study also want to honor. That contract with the viewer, the contract with the subject, and the contract with the provider. And they've shown you examples in which you have a very difficult decision to make because you're working for the BBC here and it's got to get done. And if the BBC has other people to hire too. And if you can't really make that bug movie work well, They've got other people who can. So you're going to be in a position where you're going to say, golly, we have to do the CGI. And they're going to give you guidance here to tell you what their standards are. We actually have never developed that common conversation in this country. We don't have a BBC, and that might even be a good thing. In any case, we don't, and we're not going to get one. We have, here's my thing about the BBC. It's a really, really great institution. It's a very important institution. It's a very British institution. It's a frankly elitist institution. We would never, the taxpayers of this country would never agree to have all of their media run by the people from Harvard and Princeton, which is basically what happens at the BBC, is that the elites of the graduates of the most elite institutions are the arbiters of standards. So we do have a real grassroots spirit in this country and a non-elitist language, although you wouldn't know it from the socioeconomic spectrum, but we will have to approach this differently than they do in Britain. We won't be able to depend on a BBC to say, here's how you're going to safeguard trust. It's a different business. We will need to, as a community, address these issues together in some way. What I would like to know now is these situations that we've been talking about for the last 50 minutes, in the last 10 minutes that we've got here, how are they coming up in your lives? What do you want to do about them? Ignore them. That's been working so far.
It's a great question. You're a good teacher. Here you are putting we professors on the spot. But I have to say, if it's my inclination of some of the answers are, and my dad was a seasoned journalist, I wonder if we aren't always going to gravitate a little bit towards, if it really helps a great story, we might be more inclined to use it going over the ethical points. Not horribly over, but maybe step over the line if it really serves the story.
So serving the story is an example of that third relationship, the fidelity to the project, to the funders, to the sponsors, to the project itself. If I can tell a good story, this is my raw material. However, your raw material and your relationship with your viewers, those are all actual people too. So as George was telling us earlier, these are all lives we're dealing with. And that's where it becomes more complicated than telling a good story. Patrice?
I just say, too, this idea of us making a decision on our own, I think maybe we're giving ourselves a little bit too much of the benefit of the doubt that we can be always objective. And maybe we need to ask other people these questions instead of just ourselves as the single filmmaker. I'm not sure I'm always that objective. I try to be, but I'm not sure I can trust myself. So, you know what I mean?
I don't think we're talking about objectivity. But Patrice. Oops, Miss Patrice.
Thanks for doing this, Pat. I think it's so important, and I think the best decisions will come from broader conversation, and that's what you're sparking here. I think it's really important. One of the things that troubles me is, because I do think that our viewers are the people that we need to think about a lot. At the same time, the entertainment value, I don't think is the deepest question on ethics. I'm wondering about, my worry is about this sort of political sense of who we're advocates for on the, on the people we're showing. So, when you say, okay, well, I worry about vulnerable subjects, but other subjects I can say whatever to. I think that's something that we need to explore. Because I think if our ethics are going to be credible in the larger world, in the world beyond those who may agree with the perspective of our documentaries, they have to be across the board. And I think that's going to get us into some challenging conversations, but I think they're conversations that are well worth having, so that the ethics that we develop and discuss are something that can be presented to the whole world and to people who may not agree with our films or our perspectives. We can say that, we've thought about our whole audience. We've thought about everyone that's represented in our films.
So if I could take your thought a little further here. You were speaking particularly about the first set of relationships, the relationships with the subject. Might you say, instead of do no harm to your vulnerable subjects, you might say respect the subjects of your film rather than making sure that they're not harmed? Would that?
Yes, respect, I think, is a very appropriate word, because it may be that there are people in your film who are doing harm to those vulnerable subjects. But I think respecting and making sure that you present their voice, the whole field of journalism got a bad name for taking interviews out of context. I think we have to be very clear about that and not doing that, and respecting what people's words are. Even if we think they're reprehensible words, they still have to be represented fairly and with, at least, respect for this person as a human.
Patrice, just to stay on you for one little more minute, because you made a film recently, The Fire Next Time, I believe, which has in it an extremely scary talk show guy, who makes Glenn Beck look like Bill Moyers. Can you talk about the challenge that you had dealing with him then? Because he's definitely, he's not a vulnerable subject, and he's not a nice person.
Right, not at all. And so I think one of the things that we had to do is we just used his own words. And, we would go back to him, we'd ask him very direct questions, and I don't feel that we disrespected him. He signed a release, et cetera, et cetera. One of the things that happened with him that was really scary is he asked for all of our tapes. He wanted to see all of his tapes if he would be included after he signed the release. But, so then, you get into this, what does respect mean? We did not respect that. But as much as I felt strongly that he was a really detrimental presence in that community, I think that we represented him fairly.
Okay, somebody else?
This is I run a class for in movie making for immigrants and refugees, and it's the first time any of them have ever made a movie. And I have one student right now who's making a movie that makes those of us who believe in sort of cultural sensitivity sort of gulp, and I really don't know what to do. I do know what to do. I'm going to let her make the movie and let her say whatever she wants to say, but it's still kind of frightening. She was betrothed to a chief in a village in Africa, and the nuns in the city where she was kidnapped her to protect her from being married and being circumcised, and trained her to be a nurse. And she's very proud of the fact that she was trained to be a nurse, and she's very happy that she was kidnapped from her family and from her village. And both my husband and I, when we heard this, were sort of like, this is problematical. What do we do? And both of us said, this is her story, and she's going to tell it the way she wants to tell it, and she will. It's her story.
What's problematic for you?
Catholic nuns kidnapping people.
So you don't approve of the Catholic nuns kidnapping people, but she does.
Right.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay. And are you concerned that it just looks bad, or do you think they really just shouldn't kidnap them?
Well, I think it's difficult to say, isn't it?
And do you think,
because she's being kidnapped to prevent her from being forced to marry somebody that looks really good to her family but doesn't look good to her. She was happy to be kidnapped, and happy to avoid being circumcised.
Right.
And so it's, on the other hand, I certainly don't want the Catholics to come kidnap my children, no matter what they think.
Yes,
know?
this goes beyond a straight FGM is bad documentary.
Right. So.
Okay, those of you who want to give Patricia any advice on that in the network break, which is coming up in 2 minutes, feel free. Can we get any other issues on the table to discuss during our networking break? Down here? I'm sorry. Yep.
Yeah. Just get, okay.
I think this is terrific. I think that what would be useful for me as a filmmaker is actually if you guys came up with a set of questions that we could ask, and it doesn't have to be 5 or 10. Important questions that you can process and think about as you're going through the filmmaking process itself. In terms of, you sort of lay it out there with the 3 groups that you're concerned about. I guess one question I would ask you is, with what the BBC laid out there, to me there's an expectation that the audience will have of certain kinds of films that was kind of surprising to me. For example, that if a male beetle died, that it would be inappropriate ethically to use modeling or something to display what was going on, that was the expectation of that audience. And that said, when you're looking at films that are cinema verite, are all audiences sophisticated in the sense of having an expectation that what they're seeing is not someone trying to tell a story that's the truth, but that sequentially everything's laid out accurately? And so I think, for me, one of the questions that would be really good to ask is, what's the most important thing with verite storytelling? Is it the sequence, or is it trying to find the kernel of truth in the story that you're witnessing? And having questions that, I don't know if I'm making any sense with that, but having questions that lead you to having some kind of ethical standard would actually be very beneficial. And is that what you, with Honest Truths, are trying to come to, is a set of tools for filmmakers to use, basically?
I really love the suggestion that what we need is a series of questions to ask ourselves. The study came about because we had done all this work on fair use and establishing standards for fair use. And all of those standards were developed within the fields of practice that we've worked with. We've worked with documentary filmmakers, but not only with you guys. We've worked with media literacy teachers. We've worked with dance archivists. We've worked with people who develop online curriculum and librarians. And they each have their own issues, and our job was never to tell them how to interpret fair use, but to find out what is needed in the field and how the field understands what is fair. And it was out of those discussions that people in the documentary film community said, we need a better discussion about ethics, because these are also ethics questions. And the fair use codes are not prescriptive. They are not a set of rules. They're a set of principles and limitations around common situations, that the principles are derived from a series of focus groups around the problems, so that they are effectively like what you're talking about. They're an aid to reasoning. They're not a set of rules. Most of what I've seen in the way of standards and practices for ethics, particularly in journalism, are prescriptive. They say things like, never accept money never offer money to a subject. Don't use anonymous sources. But I think what is really needed in a very open media environment is an aid to reasoning, which a set of questions definitely would be, because you would be able to have those questions and then to know what are the issues raised for the documentary community around those questions. I think it's a really smart way to go. I'm afraid that's the last brilliant thought we're going to have here until 2:30, when we return to have even more fun. Meanwhile, we are breaking because the feedback you've given us every year is you really, really love the networking part. Wait 1 second.
And if you will, please give your pollers to one of the volunteers at the door so we can collect them. And take a half an hour. There's coffee outside. Talk amongst yourselves about these issues and be back here at 2:30. Thank you.